This
concert with it.
conference will now be recorded.
Okay, since we do have a quorum, it was requested that we do have a special city council meeting, so I will call that meeting to order and turn it over to EDA President Brent Claus.
All right. First agenda on the item, I guess, to talk a little bit about the special meeting. We are looking to get a community support program put in place with some funding that we've received through the CARES Act. So that is the primary point of our discussion. From there, I'll turn it over to City Administrator Mike Johnson to introduce Lee Hall with Next Stage, who we're proposing to use to help us administer the funding of the program. So Mike, if you want to tell us a little, do the introduction there.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. And we have Lee, I see, is connected into the meeting. And so I'll go through it here in a little bit, but please accept my apologies that I don't know what I was thinking when I put the agenda together and called him John Hall. I'm not sure if I was thinking of Hall and Oates or, just exactly what it was, but on any of the materials where you see it listed as John Hall, it should be Lee Hall. And Lee, please accept my apologies for the mistaken identity on our agendas.
I've been called worse, Mike.
What I wanted to do, and I included in your packet, was information that was provided by Lee, but I thought it was appropriate at the beginning here to kind of set a foundation for the discussion on most of the materials that are forthcoming since they've been developed by Lee and Next Stage, is that he was extensively involved in assisting Hennepin County in assembling their program because Hennepin County received their CARES Act monies several months before we are getting ours right now. And so he was a central figure in helping create their program. And then the First Stop Shop used him in modeling their recently small business program that they put together for Scott County EDA businesses. And they used him and contracted with him to do that. And so that's kind of what we have in your packet today is information and a program Lee has been involved in putting together. And so I thought it was appropriate to let him introduce himself and talk a little bit about who Next Stage is so that you have the benefit and the understanding as we attempt to go through the outline of our discussion this morning, that you at least know where that's coming from. So with that, Lee.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Lee Hall. I'm with an organization called Next Stage. We're a Minnesota nonprofit organization. Principally, what we do, what we hope to spend more of our time on in the future is consulting and advising early stage and growing entrepreneurs, helping people figure out how to start, how to grow, and then do lending and financial support to keep those businesses moving as well. Obviously, these are different times for all of us, and so we're spending the majority of our time these days helping communities roll out these CARES Act dollars to support their small business community. Really what we do, excuse me, we do a couple of things in principle. First and foremost, we work with the governmental agency to give you a layer of separation between the applicant review, the financial documents of the applicant, and the governmental body. I think this is important from a political perspective in that it does really create an arm's length relationship with your business community, but more importantly, it keeps your business community financial documents, payroll documents, sensitive information. It keeps it from becoming a public record. So we can play that role in sort of a middle, nonpartisan, non-biased third-party administrator to look at the program. In terms of how we do the work, there's really kind of two things that we have to do to review a potential grant for CARES Act. There's the specific requirements that fall within the law. There's what the CARES Act requires us to do, which is to confirm that any entity receiving dollars can demonstrate that there was impact and that there are eligible expenses related to, specifically related to the crisis. The second thing that we do, and this is principally what we did in helping Hennepin County design their program, helping Scott County design their program. We launched on Monday an application process with Dakota County to help them with their process. Is really also identifying for businesses what criteria that you as a governing body have determined you want to apply for eligibility, be it business size, number of employees, location, industry, whether they were under executive order. Those decisions are really up to you to decide. This is who we think is most hurt, or this is who we think we get the greatest benefit to the community for the limited dollars we have. This is the kind of business we want to support. So we can do an eligibility review for the client, not only to determine are they qualified under the CARES Act, but then also to fit the clients into whatever box you think is appropriate for the investment of your dollars. We can and do the process really start to finish, or we can break it up into pieces if there's portions of it that you want to take internally and you want us to do more of the outside. But really the way we approach it, and the proposal that I shared with you is really a start to finish, and that's what we're doing with the Scott County CDA. We'll launch the application. We create with input from you on what questions you want to ask, the questions we have to ask, obviously, to do the work. We'll create an online application platform, help you get it out there to promote it so people can log on directly, do the provide the application material. We'll sort that application material. We'll do an initial scrub to get rid of obvious disqualifieds. If you're getting applications that are coming in from Ramsey County, those are obviously not going to fit within your program. So we'll do those sort of initial scrubs to clean up the data. We can do a sort and randomization to assign. We can do some work around that, and we can talk more about that if we get further into this. We can do some sort around that sort that if you have prioritization, if you say this is a particular type of business or area of business we want to prioritize, we can talk about how to incorporate that into a sort. But we can sort, we can help you select the businesses. Then what we would do is we have created over the last couple months working with Hennepin County and other counties, we've created a system where we're using a cloud-based secured server. We create a file tree for your program. We create individual business portals and direct secure links that we send out to each business that's selected, along with instructions of what documents they would need to provide to, again, demonstrate both eligibility for the CARES Act and that they meet whatever criteria you set. We would encourage those businesses to make those uploads directly. We assign staff to work with them through that process until we have everything we need. If along the way we determine, hey, your revenue is too much, or you have too few employees, or whatever reason you don't meet the criteria, we'll let them down gently. If they do meet all the criteria, we can work with you to develop a grant agreement between the city or the EDA and the applicants, and we can manage that process. We can put it out through signature, we put it through DocuSign, we get everything signed, we get eligibility budget. We can distribute the funds on your behalf, or you can do it directly. We can provide you the information to create payments, or we can actually do direct payment. We can do ACH directly to the applicants as the grants close. We can do some after grant review, just in terms of going back to at least a percentage of the recipients to say, show us some documentation now, show us the check, show us what you did to use the money, to at least create some sort of a paper trail that, yeah, on the front end we asked what are the eligible expenses, and then on the back end we did some double checking to see that the funds were used as they were intended. We can do a report for you that kind of wraps it up, gives you some metadata on who the applicants are, who was selected, who was approved, who was denied, and why, those sort of issues. That's a very, very long sentence. Maybe I'll just pause there for a second. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we have, over the last couple of months, we've developed some pretty good systems for this. We've spent a lot of time and a lot of energy on the technology on the front end to make it go smoothly. I have a pretty good team now. I've got a half a dozen people working on this with me, and we've gotten into a pretty good flow and rhythm working on these kind of projects. We can help. So I'll leave it to you. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, in terms of the criteria of what this program looks like, that's really up to you. But in terms of the back room, the functionality of making it happen, I do think we have the tools to really support you.
All right, thank you, Lee. From there, we'll move along to our discussion just in terms of what we'd like the program to look like. I think we've got the packet that was used for the setup and explanation for the CDA, Scott County CDA Recovery Fund. We use that as a little bit of a model. So I will open up the conversation there. Mike, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, Brent, I guess the thought I had is that probably as we get down into the determination of the discussion with either the terms or the eligible businesses, that'll kind of help frame the discussion as to what we want to do. But it ultimately comes down, as the council has authorized up to about $200,000, is that, and I've asked Lee to talk about that, where it was set up with the Scott County CD and others as a forgivable loan. In reality, that where there is 0% 12-month proposed loan and it's forgivable, if somebody didn't meet the criteria, what was the expectation of repayment and how would we collect? And in reality, through the discussions I had with him, is that likely what this really is a grant program overall. And so maybe we change the thought process under the outline from being the forgivable loan to essentially a grant, because if we get to the point that if the business fails to meet the forgiveness criteria, the reality is that there may not be anything to go collect in the end anyway. And you know, we're really not putting together loan documents on this, and so the collection in that. So I've asked him to help in the discussions that we reframe it, but that maybe I let Lee kind of walk us down through the individual paragraphs and then elicit comment with basically the biggest thing is that you know, who do we want to make these funds available to, and what's the criteria on the size or type of businesses and the parameters that we want to put on that. Because in taking a look at that, based on the monies we have, that'll determine whether in the end are we going to make available $5,000 grants, $7,500, $10,000. You know, that's really the piece that will determine kind of what we can do and what kind of impact we can have. And so if you're okay with it, I guess I would ask Lee just to kind of walk us down, and that we go through. It may be painful, but I think it'll be the easiest way to do it, is we just go through each of the major subsections in there and see what people's thoughts or ideas are as we take a look at that and see where we can reach a consensus to kind of build the outline of our program. If you're okay with that, and if the mayor's okay with that from the city side.
Sounds good.
Lee, you've got that in front of you, and I think you know it by the back of your hand that obviously in the top portion, other than making changes to likely the city or the EDA, the outline or scope of what we're trying to do, and the help in what we're providing grants for doesn't significantly change in that upper 1/3 part of the program. Correct?
I would agree. And let me just chime in on the forgivable loan versus grant question just briefly there as well. When we designed the CDA's program, we started working on that a couple of months ago before the county had received CARES dollars. So the CDA's program was funded with non-CARES money, and we really with intention created that as forgivable loan program as a precursor to maybe building an ongoing revolving loan relationship. Pretty much everyone working with CARES dollars is working with straight grants. It is a lot simpler from a paperwork perspective. All right, I'm sorry. And so the document we're looking at here, I have your agenda open, or are you talking about what I sent you?
Yes, on page 6.
Okay. I'm sorry, hang on just a second. I don't want to take up a bunch of your time. I'm having issues signing that right now. So the section you're talking about here, where are we at? You want to talk about the application process? You want to talk about the eligibility?
The eligibility would come second, but kind of the terms that you had under your old program that basically this would change it when we determine what the dollar amount is, would be a grant.
Yes.
We want to get rid of the 0 interest 12-month term.
Right.
Grants 100% forgivable after 12 months. There is really no payment in full within 30 days.
That's correct.
And then funds can be used for the operating expenses that we've identified. So just some minor cleanup in there, changing it into the grant program.
Yeah, and then on the expense side, the CARES Act, excuse me, this gets a little bit into where the requirements sort of cross and what the CARES Act requires. The CARES Act has just a few restrictions in terms of what expenses can be covered or what the funding can be used on. So we'd want to make sure we incorporate that into your eligibility proposal as well. The CARES Act cannot be used, that funding cannot be used by a business to make a city or county whole on property taxes or other fees. So we want to specifically line that out. CARES Act funding cannot be used to buy equipment or make capital improvements. It has to be operating expenses due during the time frame of the shutdown or of the crisis. So typically communities had been saying expenses incurred March 15th to June 15th. But looking at my calendar, we're well past June 15th and businesses are still seeing impact. So I think you can go further on the back end, but it would need to be expenses related to that. Some communities have chosen to exclude payroll. Some communities have chosen to include payroll. It's not a requirement either way. What is important to understand, and we would just want to highlight that in this section, is there are a lot of different programs out there right now that all have as their source funding the CARES Act. And so we do need to make sure that businesses, if they receive funding from more than one federal source, like for instance, if they got a paycheck protection loan through the SBA, we do need to demonstrate that they've funded different expenses with these dollars than they did with that PPP loan or other funding.
In simple terms, they can't double dip under both programs with federal.
That's correct. That's correct. So the way we're handling that and this gets, honestly, this is, it's going to be confusing for everybody because the state is currently running a small business program. The county is running a program. You're looking to run a program. There's federal dollars flowing in and there are new programs being launched every other day. So it's a little bit of trying to figure out, has anyone applied yet? Have they gotten money yet? But the way we're handling it is we're presenting a budget document to selected applicants, asking them to list all of their eligible expenses during the time frame that's identified, then list any other dollars they've received, whether it's from the SBA EIDL or the SBA PPP, whatever, and assign those dollars to see what's left for eligible expenses for this program.
So now we're down into the meat of taking a look at walking through what you previously had for eligible businesses. And that one we probably ought to take line by line to enable input into the process to see what variations or variables we might want to create in this process. The first one we've got is that it's you had originally must meet all the following criteria as of March 1 of 2020 to be eligible. And you chose that because that was just ahead of the start of the pandemic. Is that right? Is that why?
Yeah, that's correct. And what we were specifically looking at in those cases is if you're going to suggest that a business needed to have a certain number of employees, for instance, our thought on that was, well, we were more interested in how many employees they had before the pandemic than asking them in April when they've been maybe forced to lay some people off. So we were really looking at, if you're defining what we think the businesses that should be eligible are, we're defining it based on what did that business look like pre-pandemic.
Okay. Second bullet point was that it be locally owned and operated for-profit business with a physical establishment. I would put within the New Prague corporate city limits. If we're providing this program to both Scott and LeSueur County businesses, our only distinguishing capabilities would be to put the New Prague corporate city limits. That since the funding is coming from us and we're intending it to be for New Prague, that's the only way I know how to kind of lay that part out. The next one is probably one of the bigger ones as we take a look at what do we want
Mike?
this. I'm sorry.
Mike, I'm wondering if Lee could define what locally owned means.
That's a great question, and let me tell you what the intent of that was, and we can define it however we like, or you can define however you like. The intent of that was one of the questions we get into when we start talking about who's eligible and who's not eligible is, what do you do with franchises, or what do you do with national businesses or national brands? And I think that where we were going with was the locally owned line in there was, at least in other communities, and again, this is for you to decide for your community. In other communities, we thought just because Subway is a national brand, if the guy who owns it is a local guy, he's running a local sandwich shop, he just pays a fee to use the Subway name. Other communities wanted to make that business eligible. They didn't want to make a corporate business that's, doesn't have a local owner. It's just a franchise, you know what I'm saying? It's their ownership is a stock group out in Delaware. It's that was the distinction they were trying to make with that line is, what do you do with if somebody has a local fitness studio, but they pay Snap or whatever for the right to use that name? That's why we put in the local ownership.
So the fact that the owner lives in Shakopee or Minneapolis or South Dakota, they would still be defined as locally owned if it was a local presence business, or how do you get where I'm coming? Is the owner important?
I absolutely get what you're saying. My opinion is yes, but that is ultimately up to you to say. If this body says we want the business to be in our city and we want the owner to live in our city, you narrow your pool of potential applicants, but that's entirely your call. If you say it's fine if they live in Scott County, it's fine if they live in the metro, it's fine if they live in Wisconsin, that's ultimately really up for you to decide. I'm just explaining the reason that the language is in there asking for local ownership was to specifically eliminate it's owned by an investment group on the East Coast, not an individual. It's not an owner operator business.
So Lee, does that need or require more clarification with Bruce's question? Is there more that needs to be required or explained or detailed out in this process beyond what you already have there?
I think it would be helpful for me when we get to the point of reviewing these businesses to have, if not hard, guidelines from you, at least a good sense of what, from your perspective, you would want to do with those types of businesses. If I am looking at a national brand with an owner, do you care where that owner lives? I guess that I need that guidance from you as I'm doing the review.
I guess, Brent, that's kind of a question for the EDA that in this early on process, what do members think?
Hey, this is Eric. I don't necessarily think we need to further classify it. I'm okay with the locally owned aspect, because then as we jump down to the next bullet point there, if we have some sort of restriction on the amount of revenue, I just can't think of a business that would, kind of like you're alluding to, a franchise that just plops itself into New Prague and doesn't have local ownership, that then wouldn't be disqualified by the next bullet point. So I guess, not to make it too difficult, I would be fine with just continuing with the must be locally owned theme that you've used previously.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's Brent.
I almost wonder if we should take it out completely, because I don't know that we need to say locally owned, but.
Oh, well, yeah, I would be supportive of that too. I thought you were trying to drill it down further to owner must reside in New Prague city limit proper or something along those lines. So I guess in the spirit of the direction you're thinking, I'm supportive of that too.
I'm just trying to think of ways to avoid confusion so we don't get people upset or kind of eliminate some questions along the way. But
Well, let's try to.
Simpler is definitely better.
You know, we're not going to satisfy 100% of the businesses or the entities in town in doing this process. All we can generally do is to try to do the best we can, and there may be some implications as we go through this that's going to impact people differently. And I don't know that it's possible to create something that's going to satisfy 100% of the business population out there. And you've had success so far when you ran this for the Scott County side of it, that you didn't have too much trouble, did you?
No, and I agree. I think the comment was spot on. Once you put the revenue limit on it, even in Hennepin County dealing with 2,000 applications, we didn't actually run into, this didn't really come up in terms of where is the ownership. Once you cap the size of the business, it does pretty well narrow down who we're trying to focus on.
All right, why don't we move on, or we'll be here probably all day to try to get through this. So the next one is really that what does the business have to employ? That you've got 3 to 20. I'll only give you, as you think about this one, and there may be multiple opinions, is I've gotten a number of calls from some of the local businesses in the community where it may be a single employee employer run business. And so as you take a look at that, and that's a business downtown, that the business owner is the only employee. And so the parameters of what we set here will have a dramatic bearing on who's eligible to apply. And so I'll just leave it go at that for your discussion.
I had a couple questions there. One I'd like to ask Lee is if you ran into, just talking about eligible employees versus FTEs, thinking more so in the restaurant space, because I would imagine we'll see a few requests from that area where you might have a restaurant that has, 25 part-time employees. Did you get that specific with the distinction, or did you just simply work off an FTE model rather than employee model?
So we actually worked off a hard count employee model, and the reason for that is that it's just much easier to confirm. A company's W-3 annual filing will tell you the total number of W-2s they paid out. Their quarterly 941, the first line of it is how many employees were paid during the last quarter. None of that tells us whether those were 3 hours or 40-hour employees. So purely from a confirmation perspective, as we're getting data in and trying to confirm what a company had, it's far easier to confirm number of employees than it is to confirm FTEs. This is, to me, this is the biggest, maybe even more so than revenue, this is the biggest limiting factor in deciding how many applicants you're going to get and how focused you make your program. At the CDA level, the 3 employees is the most restrictive program I've worked on yet. Other communities I've worked in, Hennepin County required 1 employee who wasn't the owner. They just wanted to work with a business that wasn't a sole proprietor. They wanted to work with a business that employed at least 1 person. Dakota County, the state of Minnesota, some other programs now are actually working on a no employee model. They've set a cap of up to 50 employees, but they're not requiring any employees on the bottom end. Scotts County is at 3, is very restrictive in terms of exactly the businesses you're talking about. You've got the single owner operator or the person who runs the shop themselves, and maybe they have 1 part-time employee who comes in. You do eliminate those businesses. We knew that on the Scott County program, the CDA program, but we were working with a very limited dollar amount for the entire county. And so the CDA understood they needed to be very restrictive in terms of their eligibility requirements. We still received 5 times as many applications as there was available dollars at the CDA level, even making it a very restrictive program. So I don't say this to say you should be that restrictive or you shouldn't be that restrictive. I say this to say this is really the critical point here, though, where you decide what is the profile of the business that you want to support and how many businesses do you think you're going to be able to support. whether or not you want to encourage more or fewer to apply here.
So in general, what is our goal? I guess that's what he's saying. Are we going to try to get to the Main Street business? Are we going to, focus on sole proprietor downtown business? Is that really the goal of this? I guess that's kind of where we're at. And I know that's the goal of the meeting, but I guess that really does need some discussion now.
I don't know that
In
you
my
want to.
opinion, I think we need to try to get as many businesses of eligible, because obviously we're looking at survival limit, versus, just expanding their business. We want to make sure that when this is all said and done, we still have a vibrant downtown. So I would propose going from 0 to maybe 50 employees, so that you do get the restaurants in and that sort of thing. And then, if the $1 million annual revenue is adequate enough to give eligibility to those businesses that are trying to survive.
I would concur to make it as easy as possible, to less restrictive.
Yeah, I agree. I like the 0 to 50 number.
Same.
Is the assumption is if we don't hear from other members, they're in concurrence with that?
Yeah, that works for me. Would we be able to make an exception for the restaurant industry to not exclude them for the $1 million if they break that in revenue? I just feel there's potentially a couple restaurants here in town that would break that revenue threshold, even though they could certainly demonstrate that this has hit them hard.
I think that'd probably be across all industries, honestly. I mean, just looking at the company I work for, they're over $1 million revenue, but they're 10 employees, and it's kind of the same situation as restaurants. We're definitely been affected too. So I think that $1 million revenue will probably exclude a lot of businesses, whether it's 10 employees or 50 employees.
But again, it
Yeah,
comes
and
back.
depending on, right. Well, depending on what you're looking at the industry, revenue doesn't necessarily tell the whole picture either. So that's,
Yep.
I think that's a good consideration too.
Can we carve out, Lee, or do we have to raise the revenue number?
You can do it either way. The state, excuse me, the most recent state program, the one that went 0 to 50 employees, removed a revenue requirement altogether. I think another clean way to do it, if you do want to carve it out a little bit, would be you could have different rules for the businesses that were under the governor's executive orders 2008 and 2004 versus everybody else, which would get your restaurants, your gyms, your salons. You're probably not going to have a lot of salons over $1 million in revenue, but I'm saying if you wanted a clean way to say, without having to literally sit here, go through an NAICS book and try and choose every business code who's in which batch, you could subset by saying these are the rules that apply to executive order businesses versus non-executive order businesses. You could raise the revenue cap for everyone, or you could completely throw it out. I think those are all workable ideas.
To me, I think if you went with 1 to 20 employees, or falling under the impacted businesses with the governor's shutdown, executive orders, I think, and then added or owner operated, I think you'd probably cover what we're looking for at that point.
A separate owner occupied, Brent?
Owner operated.
Oh, it's a separate category?
Yeah, owner operated, 1 to 20 employees, because that takes care of the owner operated language would take care of your 0 employee situation. If you go, you can, if you just go 0 to 20, I don't, I've seen a couple things there, I guess, just through the PPP that kind of struck me as difficult. And then you really that $1 million revenue cap, because you're not going to wind up with your larger employers capping it at 20. The executive order portion is going to pull in your service businesses, restaurants that were shut down, and then you've got that revenue cap there for those that are in maybe a more profitable or larger scale industry that didn't have to deal with those orders.
I think I like that idea, especially like the executive order part, so that nothing would fall through the cracks then. I really like that idea.
I just lost my audio, so I'm not sure what discussion I need to pick up from the last bit of discussion that occurred.
I think we're pretty much done now.
Summary of it. You missed some great stuff.
If it came from Bruce, I'm sure it did.
Summary of it would be 1 to 20 employees or owner operated, capping at $1 million in revenue or falling under the executive orders.
So really, you'd be saying if you meet one of these 3 criteria, you're eligible. And I completely agree with you on the sole proprietor and the PPP. I worked on the PPP loans for about 6 weeks prior to getting going on this stuff, and it was the sole proprietor in particular was problematic.
Okay, we would still retain the W-2 eligible employee provision, Lee, is your recommendation?
Yeah, as one of the 3 potential, what I'm hearing is as one of the 3 potential criteria. If they're not an owner operator, they're not under executive order, then they could still demonstrate 1 to 20 employees. Is that what I heard?
Correct.
Okay. What did you mean in the next statement, Lee, that must be licensed?
So this is going to come up only for a few industries or a few businesses, but it's something that some communities have wanted to. We can leave it in, we can take it out, and I want to be clear on any of this. This is really up to you to decide. But where the issue came up, or where it came in conversations with other communities, is they said, well, if we have a business in town where it's problematic, we know they're in code violations, we know they're in violation of city rules or licensing, they didn't necessarily want to give that business a grant. So it was a provision to say, okay, if they're on a county level, if they're behind on property taxes, on a city level, if they have a licensing requirement, and not all businesses do, but if they have a licensing requirement and they're in violation of that or code violations, that you could exclude them from the list. That does require on your side, if you want to keep something like that in, it does require on your side that someone needs to look at the applicant list and tell me whether there's a violation or a reason to kick them out. You can leave it, we can leave it and trust people to answer it honestly, or we can take it out. It's really up to you.
We can leave that and check with Ken out of community development, that shouldn't be difficult. The in good standing, that's just with Secretary of State, correct?
Right, and we're not excluding, let me be clear on this one, we're not excluding businesses that are not currently registered and active in good standing, but we are holding the closing for that. So it's come up in 5% of the businesses we go through the review. Hey, it doesn't look like you're registered with the state right now. Can you update that? Let me know when it's done and we'll move forward on the process.
Okay. And then obviously we are concerned to make sure that there are no delinquent property taxes if we're providing the funding. And then you've got must demonstrate a significant loss in revenue since March 15th. You've got no credit score or collateral requirements apply.
I would just take that line right off.
You don't have to demonstrate a loss then?
No, I'm sorry. You absolutely have to demonstrate a loss. That's a requirement of the CARES Act. We have to demonstrate impact. The no collateral or credit part, I meant you can remove that part. I apologize. I meant the second half of that line.
And do they have to demonstrate at least the amount of the award amount or the grant amount?
That's your call. That's not what the guidance from the Treasury says in the CARES Act, but it certainly makes sense. I've seen other communities try and tie it to the grant amount can't be more than a percentage of annual revenue. I've seen the grant amount can't be more than the actual loss, but they're, in terms of how the law is written and the guidance from the Treasury, these are two completely disassociated concepts. You have to demonstrate that there's impact. You have to demonstrate that they have eligible expenses, but it doesn't actually tie the two together, which maybe is crazy. So I don't think it would be wrong to say, yeah, you have to show a loss that's at least as much as the grant amount, but that's not required by the law.
I would support that idea. I just would feel uncomfortable with someone actually making money on the project. And then someone else not getting any. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I'm supportive of that. This is Eric. Are they providing P&Ls, Lee, or what have you seen in other applications just to demonstrate the significant loss?
So for all of these categories, we give the businesses a few different, we give them a few different ways to demonstrate it. But this one is really the most wide open because every business is a little different. The preferred method would be, yes, let's get P&Ls, and that's what we would ask for. But we've also asked, what we're asking is that they provide us some documentation that's apples to apples. So if it's, let us see if you file sales tax, let's see your last few periods sales tax filing versus your April and May sales tax. Or if you can produce a point of sale report from Square or from your register, or we've taken bank statements where we're looking at what are your deposits, what have your average monthly deposits been for the period leading up to this, what are they now? It really is, hopefully businesses have good financial statements, but that's not the reality. Not everyone, I mean, you got businesses out there that are handing shoe boxes of receipts to their accountant in April. And so we're not going to be able to get good period P&Ls from those businesses. So we're trying to be as responsive as possible to say, what else can you show us? As long as we can get hard documents from somebody that gives us an apples to apples comparison to demonstrate the loss.
I hope that's what I was going for. Just the business reporting is not always that great, so you have a number of other ways that you've used, so that's good for me.
We're talking about a loss of revenue, not a loss of income. So we could have a situation where someone's actually made more money this year, but suffered a loss of revenue, and they would qualify. Is that correct?
I think that is in fact possible. And I don't know from a practical perspective, how we would necessarily stop that.
Yeah, that's okay. I just make sure they understand we're talking about revenue, not income.
Yes.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, the CARES Act defines it as a significant decline in demand. So that's revenue.
Yeah, and I think just having that language in there hopefully would disqualify, or you know, business owner looking at that would self-disqualify as they look at the program, just thinking about the intent of it. You know, it's something we could run into, but I would think that with most businesses, they would go, oh, okay, well, you know, at least something to discourage that possibility.
Lee, just because you don't have them written down under the eligibility, are there other items that other entities have used or added that we don't see here that are worth talking about or looking at? Obviously, we're a smaller community than some of the larger groups that you're dealing with, but is there anything else we should be thinking of or is different, or that maybe the EDA city wants to target differently? Any thoughts on any of those possibilities?
Well, so the one thing that I would say, again, this is the issues of the gray areas and really defining your intent is super important, is um, the what it means to be a business in your city. I think the proposal that pretty much up to this point most communities have gone with is that they're looking to fund businesses that are not home based. They're looking to fund businesses that have a physical presence in the community. But there's a lot of gray area to that. You have independent salon people who rent chairs. You have food manufacturing businesses who maybe rent space in a commercial kitchen. You're going to have businesses, excuse me, you're going to have businesses who rent a storage locker or have a PO box at the mailbox, etc., who are going to claim they have an address that isn't their residency. And some of those are easier questions to answer than others. But in terms of the review, I think it's important of really understanding, first of all, how committed to you are the idea of whether you want to include home base or not, and then how do you define what isn't home base?
Then let's go to the next listing, is that the businesses that are ineligible. Let's go down through that list if we can. Have you got that list in front of you, Lee?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And for the members, Brent, as we walk down, do we want to just try to walk through those and just kind of get a yay or nay to help clarify just exactly what he's talking about?
Yeah, and here again, let me be clear that I don't personally have a strong opinion one way or another on passive real estate, on tobacco, on sex-oriented businesses, on any of these, anything that's listed here. I'm not saying they should be ineligible because I think the CARES Act says they should be ineligible or because I think they should be ineligible. I'm just sharing with you what other communities have come up with. The excuse me, the home-based question, some communities have chosen to exempt childcare. They would say no home base. Other communities have said no home base unless it's a childcare business. Again, that's a distinction you can make. I can tell you that I have a meeting at 9 o'clock. We're discussing at the county level support directly for home-based childcare providers. So while if you do think that's something that's important, but you don't want to include in your program, that doesn't mean that those businesses won't necessarily also get help. But again, larger picture is you really can decide for yourselves what you believe should be ineligible.
Brent, you want to walk the group down through it and just get a yay or nay or a clarification? Oh, Brent, can't hear.
Any thoughts around the first one with being home based or physical establishment?
I think with the number of in-home daycares in New Prague, it would be, if we were going to leave the home-based as an exclusion, we would want to make that overriding commitment that we would still accept applicants from home-based daycares.
Yeah, I think that's an area where that would probably, that there's enough that could run through all of our funds.
Not sure, is that consistent? Are you saying the same thing? We should exclude them or include them?
I would lean toward an exclusion, as I think we're going to see some further action in that space. I hope we're going to see some further action in that space.
Yeah, the state has recently announced an additional program specifically to support daycares where they're going to provide fixed monthly payments for the next 3 months to every daycare in the state, including home base. So there is definitely additional action to support that segment.
That's good. I was unaware of that.
I would generally support excluding home-based businesses just because of the property tax angle. We would support our property tax capacity if you support people that have physical locations.
Yeah, I was leaning the same way, that their business address is classed commercial. They'd be eligible. Anything else would be ineligible if they were classed residential.
So I'm hearing the consensus, leave it as is.
Yes.
All right. Number 2 is nonprofit organizations.
I've got nothing against including them, but I have a tough time thinking of any that would fall into the space that I'm aware of. So I'm okay with leaving an exclusion there.
Maybe the churches mostly, I would guess, for jobs.
Yeah, right. Right.
I think it's hard to judge it where the revenue doesn't look like a business. I mean, where it's hard to show a drop in sales or revenue or whatever. I think the one instance where you can see nonprofits, I'm sorry, I know you guys actually want to get through this stuff, so I should just let you move on. But the one instance where you can see something that is a nonprofit, but I think fits the impact what you're looking for, is if you consider like a VFW or American Legion or something like that, where on the surface, exterior, they really look like a business, but the ownership they're a nonprofit in terms of how they're registered.
Well, we do have that issue, and I did have an inquiry from IE, the new Prague Park Ballroom, which is essentially run by the Legion. And so that's the kind of one that could be impacted from this decision.
Maybe the way you get around that is not only nonprofits that were also impacted by the executive order. I mean, your Legion or that type of a business would have also had to shut down because of executive order.
And
so
they
at least
did.
you separate your service-based nonprofits from your, essentially a public business that happens to be a nonprofit.
Well, churches were affected too, so I'm not. Or maybe you could say tax exempt qualified would be excluded.
Or you can just leave nonprofits out entirely, and I can stop making more challenging as we go.
So leave it
I'm
as
fine
is.
with the exclusion. Yeah. I don't know where everyone else stands on that, but I think the general direction that I've understood we wanted to head was just in more of the for-profit Main Street type businesses rather than religious institutions, charitable organizations, that sort of thing.
But I still think like the Park Ballroom and the KC Hall that lost a lot of revenue because they're not having weddings and other functions there, I think should be included. So I don't know how we get around that.
You could say nonprofits except those that are tax exempt. The ballroom's not tax exempt, I don't believe.
Yeah, that would qualify them in the KC Hall. Those are the only two that come to my mind that, their business model had revenue reductions because of the COVID, even though they're run by a nonprofit.
Bruce, was that they are tax exempt or are not tax exempt?
I think if you said that ineligible would be nonprofits except those that are tax not, am I wording that right? Not tax exempt?
Yeah.
You're talking about a double negative here, but
you could just say tax exempt nonprofits are ineligible.
Right. That's why you get paid the big bucks.
All right, I've got it. Lee, you want to keep going on these? Self-employed independent contractors or businesses with no employees other than the owners.
So
I think we've knocked that one out with
Yeah,
our previous conversation.
Right.
And to clarify again, you're okay with funding self-employed or owner-operated as long as they have a physical location?
Exactly.
Right.
Okay. Corporate chains not owned or operated by a new Prague resident. Okay.
Yeah, this one matters now because you've removed your revenue cap for businesses that were impacted by executive order. So now, and I apologize, I don't know the complete makeup of your business community there, but if you have an out-of-town restaurant chain, we've now made them eligible based upon the eligibility criteria we've set.
I think the only
Do we
change
wanna-
we have is what? Subway? We don't really have, those are just licensed franchises. So we really don't have any chains.
So my thoughts there, I guess a question I would have is, do we want to throw that owned and operated, because we do already have the requirement of a physical location in the community. Do we want to, if we're talking ownership, cast a little wider net and say the three county area? We don't want to come back and exclude somebody that would fall under the eligible business guideline because, say, they live outside of city limits, but their business is within the city limits here. We're going to run into that to some degree, whether we want to carve out the 3 county area here with Scott, LeSueur, and Rice and use that. I could see that being a problem.
I would agree. I can think of just a number of businesses off the top of my head here where the business is located within the city limits, but their owner does not reside here within. Within itself. So expanding that some to capture those businesses, I feel, would be beneficial.
So Lee, your thoughts from what you're hearing on the language change here?
I'm fine with it. Again, you don't have to restrict where the owner lives at all. It's really just a question about, again, and if it sounds like if you don't have, national corporate restaurants in your city anyway, it may be that it's completely unnecessary distinction.
That was what I was going to say. I think you could just make that one go away, that we've kind of taken care of that with the previous conversation around just general eligibility of the business. I think we keep the language as far as business in default with a financial institution prior to February 29th. And same, I guess, for gambling, adult entertainment, pawn shops, guns, tobacco shops. The last one there, I guess I'd be interested to hear what everybody thinks around real estate transactions, property groups, that sort of thing. I guess I'm fine with an exclusion there. I'm not thinking of anything that readily comes to mind that would even fall under that.
I tend to agree. I think the program is trying to help support jobs, and that's an area that doesn't really support job retention.
Yep, I'm okay with the exclusion too.
Brent, did you say we would keep the default conditions?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, that if you're dealing with a business that was already in a default situation coming into the pandemic and the executive orders, that probably, I could see making the case for it, but I don't think the optics are real good there when you've got somebody that already was in a situation where they were dealing with some level of failure.
I would agree with that. I just don't know how would you check this or determine that? How would you go about that?
At this point, what we're asking people to do is sign a certification. I mean, I completely agree with you. It's pretty hard to actually confirm it. It's more of a, it's more of something you put out there and hope that people sort of self-select.
Do you have, Lee, is there any sort of, I don't know what the documentation would look like, but is there any sort of clawback provision should we find that somebody, for lack of a better example, is fraudulent on information provided in their application? Or do you kind of lose that with going away from the loan?
No, the grant agreement that we're utilizing, the grant agreement actually we're going to utilize with the CDA in Scott County says if it's determined that you later determined you weren't actually eligible or that you provided fraudulent information, that the grant is due and repayable. Now, again, saying that's true and actually getting the funds is, you understand.
Yep, I get it.
Mm-hmm. But yes, absolutely, that would be in there.
So
that,
Brent, I want to understand that you said that, because obviously we have a couple tobacco and vaping products businesses in town, but you're saying you're going to exclude those.
If it's the EDA's intent to do that.
Okay.
It just says you're not, that they're not on your preferred business support list, that although they're a business in town, you're not planning to take public dollars to help encourage that activity.
Okay.
So that last clause, the property management one, would that exclude our like landscaping companies that cut lawn and around town?
No, I would think your property management groups would be your companies that are collecting rents, managing properties from that aspect.
Not the physical.
Right.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
All right, Lee, you want to go through the next two paragraphs within your...
I'm sorry, Mike, I can't jump around screens too easily. What's next up?
Underneath the ineligible businesses applied for and were awarded, again, it just reiterates COVID-related federal funding such as the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan or the Patriot Program. They're also eligible and encouraged to apply, but then you've got restrictions in there that they can't double count.
Right, and then the next section is the, but if they got the state funds or county funds, they're out. Yeah, and again, these are decisions that you can make. We absolutely need to determine they don't spend the money on the same thing. Largely, cities and counties have tried to sort of step around each other and not fund the same businesses, but that ultimately is your call whether you want to exclude they got funding from the county or they got funding from the state. And it's also your call whether you want to include businesses that got PPP or EIDL funding from the feds. I'll tell you that at the CDA level, we asked the question in the application. We said you're eligible if you got PPP or EIDL, but tell us if you did so we can be aware of it as we're working through the budgeting. 95% of the applicants indicated that they had received PPP or EIDL. So I think if you were to exclude businesses that receive those federal programs, we would probably be cutting out the vast majority of your businesses. But yeah, that's either way, we have to determine whether they got PPP or whether they got money from the state. We have to determine what they spent it on. But it's really up to you to decide whether you want to exclude or cut out businesses that got other specific CARES money from the state or the county.
Eric, did you have anybody that comes to mind that used the small business emergency loan program, or were pretty much everybody you worked with under the PPP and the economic injury?
Correct. I didn't have many people use the Minnesota Small Business Emergency Loan, but did have a number of people apply and qualify for the EIDL.
I guess my thinking there is we can keep the paragraph that encourages people who or companies that I'm fine again with the PPP and the idle loans. You know, again, we've got the repayment form there that spells out pretty obviously the ability to separate, so we know we're not paying eligibility twice. But you look at a lot of those recipients from the PPP, I would assume are going to be rolling through the majority of their funding just on payroll. So this could be some help in addition to cover rent, utilities, overhead type of expenses. And I think we can probably just do away with the emergency loan language, that entire last paragraph there.
I'm not sure I'm following you, Brent, out of those two.
So we've got the two paragraphs there. Keep the first one, do away with the second one. I think is the quickest summary.
So Brent, can you continue with that thought about the PPP's already used up for somebody for expenses that was only supposed to go through a certain time frame anyway? This project can take its or be added to, and we can do eligibility is income.
Say that I missed the last part there, Pete.
Well, so so if somebody's in a PPP and we say that's fine, we just have to show that they've used up all their funds, and most of it's going to be used for paying payroll anyway. That was an okay expense, so that's used up. Now we want this program to come in on top of it and do the same thing. Can we use this money for payroll?
Yeah, if you've got excess there, I think the important thing is to make sure you're not using it to fund payroll that's already been covered by one of the other programs.
Right.
And if you go a little further forward, there's a pretty simple sheet that lets them do that calculation. Most of the companies that I'm working with, there's a couple industries where it's a little more sketchy, but I think that got addressed by the expansion from going to 8 weeks to 24-week period with the program. I think you're going to see a lot of those businesses not need to use overhead items. They're going to meet most of the forgiveness requirements just through payroll. So right. I think that these funds could then be an addition where they could use overhead, whether it's rent, lease expense, utilities, whatever it might be, to come in and use those expenses to meet the requirements for this.
Okay, so if this is going to be a $5,000 grant and we're looking at companies up to $1 million, do you think it's going to be worth the application if we make it too hard? Because I don't know if it's going to be worth it for them. Or are we going to see enough people that really want this? I guess I
think there's going to be demand for it. I guess I don't think I think most of the window we're looking to keep this program in, that we should see a pretty good response.
Okay. At the $5,000 level, you don't think we need to go?
Well, I don't know what that level is going to be. You know, if we decide to go up to 10,000, or if based on demand, if we look at a lower amount, I guess that probably is the next step of the discussion, is where we want to cap things at, and the amounts we want to look to, and how we want to go about if there's less demand, if there's more demand, that's probably the next part we got to get into here.
Right.
And I think that is the question of the day as we take a look at it in general from all of the discussion and things we've walked through. In taking the 200,000, do we want to do 40 of these at 5,000 a piece? Do we want to do 20 of these at 10,000 a piece? Do we want to do 26 at $7,500? What is the comfort level and the gauge of what the EDA would like to, how would you like to spread out that $200,000?
Hey, Mike, before you get too far, that $200,000, has that been determined that that's our number, or is that what we're going up to 200,000 and the city council hasn't determined what the maximum is yet?
Well, you did in the action that you took is that there was a minimum of 100,000 up to a maximum of 200,000 for the program. And then we had the costs on top of that, if you remember.
Right.
So it was 214,000 or basically 108 on the low end. And by utilizing that, essentially that was a third of the CARES Act monies that we've got that you've allocated towards business support at this time.
I'm just
The more
wondering
business-
if Joe could tell us maybe how many they saw countywide with the $5,000 increment, if that is a target number.
Go
How
ahead,
many
Joe.
did see, Joe?
Lee, you probably have that number on hand closer than I do.
84.
84, you said, Lee?
84. But again, Scott County, the CDA level application was the most restricted with the 3+ employees. This isn't apples to apples, obviously. I can tell you Dakota's, which was closer to what you're talking about, it was 0 to 50 employees, got 514 applications in the first 24 hours. So obviously Dakota as a county is much, much larger than the city of New Prague. I think your expectation, I don't know. I think if you've opened up your criteria to the extent that most businesses in town, pretty much any business in town that has a physical location is going to qualify. It's a matter of your marketing. If you know how many businesses you have in town, if you've got 120 businesses, I don't think it's unreasonable to think you'll get 60. If you've got 180 businesses, you might get 100 plus applications.
Lee, some of the area communities I think are going a little higher, like Jordan and Shakopee are having 10 to 15,000 on their programs. Is that correct, Savage?
Yeah, that's correct. Most communities that we're looking at, the state is really kind of led out with their program, which is mirrored on the Hennepin County's original program, Dakota's program, Carver's program. Most communities are looking at around 10,000 now with the CARES funding. The challenge here is, and this I know will sound crazy, but the challenge here is actually getting the money out the door. The one thing that you can't really do, or that you won't have time to do, is go back and try and do another round of applications if you don't get enough the first time. So I think that if, to a certain extent, it maybe makes sense to err on the side of doing a little bit larger grants to make sure that you get the dollars out in the first round of the application. Hennepin County's program, and there are a million reasons for this, don't read too much into this, but Hennepin County's program, only about half of the applications actually ended up there. The county allocated enough dollars to fund every single application that came in, and even with that funding behind it, only half of the applicants actually ultimately were approved and moved forward. So there's non-responsiveness. I can't explain it, but people apply for this and then won't respond to requests to say, okay, you've been selected. There are people that opt out once you get into the process. And then there's the myriad of reasons that people can't prove eligibility. So it's not crazy to think that you're going to need twice as many applications as you expect to actually fund.
Yeah, I had given that a little thought. I don't know if it makes sense where we say whether you call it up to 10,000, up to 15,000, with a minimum of 5,000, so that you have the ability simply to get all of the funds out in one round of the program. You know, say you call it 10,000 and we only wind up with 16 businesses. Well, the other 40,000, are we just going to sit on that, or are we going to divvy that up with the with the folks that did apply? I'd prefer to go that route and just get those dollars out into the community, hopefully providing some benefit to the affected businesses, rather than just letting it sit.
But
Given the fact that we've had the, oh, go ahead.
Well, we won't know which ones fall out until the end though. So how do we adjust the number if we don't know it until the very end? I just wonder how logistically, how did that work?
You set a maximum and you set a minimum, and then you would include language just saying any undispersed funds would be divided among approved applicants at the closure of the program.
Then you got to still go back and see if they qualify.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yep.
what we're doing at the CDA level right now is we're qualifying them for the grant as the grant was designed. But in our processing documents, I just added a column to just keep track of what the total eligible expenses they reported was. So we won't have to go back and do the work all over again. We can look at the end and go, all right, what businesses qualified for more than we actually gave them? So it's doable, and I think that's the right approach. I think that you set what you think is a reasonable grant amount. No one's going to be super mad if you come back to him and say, "Hey, good news, we got an extra $2,000 for you."
Sounds great.
So
But
Lee,
you're still saying get a one level for the program initiation.
I think that's you need to tell people what they're applying for, and so I think that makes sense to say it's up. But I could see saying, yeah, it's an up to $10,000 grant or up to 7,500 or whatever you feel comfortable with that you think represents the size of the business community you have. And then I just think you include language in there that says, right in the guidelines or whatever, that grant amount may be adjusted up or down depending on subscription. And I mean, some of these questions answer themselves once you close the application and see how many applications you actually got.
So in your experience, the higher the grant dollar, the more people are going to be interested?
I think so. I think particularly also the consideration is because whether you've taken it out of your guidelines, but other communities or programs guidelines do say if you receive local dollars, if you receive a grant from the city, you're not eligible for the county's money. If you receive a grant from the county, you're not eligible for the state's money, and vice versa. So one of the challenges of setting a lower dollar amount is if the city says, well, we'll give you a grant for 5,000, your applicant, your business has an application pending. They haven't heard from the state whether they got that grant yet. If the county opens an additional round here, they don't know whether they've gotten the county money yet. Are they hesitant to take your money because they're holding out to see if they can get a larger grant from someone else? So I think there's some advantages to aligning the dollar amounts so that your applicant isn't trying to pick and choose which program. They're just saying, hey, I'm going to apply and see where I get funded.
so Brent, what's the dollar amount you guys want to use?
I would support a minimum of 7,500.
I agree. I think that's a good number. I think 5,000 looks like may not be enough for $1 million business, but I think once you get over that, they're going to go through the hoops to get the money. I think we need at least that.
You just look at kind of the ballpark at rents and expenses that I think are typical for the community. You know, $7,500 amount, I think for a lot of those businesses is going to cover, depending on where they are, 3 to 6 months rent type of expense, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
And that, I think, kind of fits the need that we're dealing with.
I mean,
that would be what, 25, 26 applicants based on 200,000. And then, you know, say we only get 15, 10, whatever. Well, then we can look at dispersing the rest of that to those who qualify.
I agree.
How many businesses do you think we have in New Prague? About 160 or 150 or somewhere in there? Or do we have a number?
Ken?
gonna say that'd be a good one for Brooke, but she had to hop off, it looks like.
I don't have a count. I can look at our list here real quick. Give me a second. Brooke would obviously have a chamber number, but let me look here real quick.
I'm just wondering if we could speculate how many businesses have a physical presence, and just to get an idea, is it 25 will get 25 grants out of 100 qualifying? Or whatever penetration, what would we expect to get? I agree with your logic. I agree with that. I just would hope that we're penetrating a decent percentage of the eligible.
So Bruce, on that logic, you think a $5,000 level would get more people? Is that what you're saying? We could serve more people?
Yeah, obviously, I wish we could give everyone that qualifies something. I mean, but that doesn't make sense. And if we had a better, more time, more resources, we'd rather do it by merit, but that doesn't seem like that's possible, so.
Well, we still have the CARES Act funding requirements that come into play here that we've got to deal with.
I mean, Lee, we could do it based on the most impacted, but it would be a lot more work to try to go through the financial analysis to do all that.
Right. It would mean you would need to vet every applicant you get so you could rank them. It also just honestly would open you up to a fair amount of criticism on the back end of the people you determine weren't impacted.
We've got on our business list 210 physical locations. Some of the physical locations do have more than one business in them. So, and I don't have a breakdown of that just because I can't sort my spreadsheet that way. So there's over 200 for sure. Probably closer to 250.
But some of those are home-based though, right? That's just your physical address.
No, none of these are home-based. These are all commercial locations. Yep.
I would imagine that by the time you look at the conditions for qualification we've put in place, you probably cut that list about 30%, maybe a little more. You know, you lose your hospital, school district, grocery store, manufacturers, a lot of the more industrial companies. Think back to the business retention calls that we've been doing just based on the same list. And I think you probably knock out a good third, maybe up to half of those. So I think you probably get down to your pool of 100 in that range would be my guess. Probably even a smaller number than that. I think then you start looking at the financial reporting requirements. I think, you know, you look at probably your typical bar. I have some questions. You know, some of those are run very well. Some of them are run where there's a lot of cash transactions. So I think there's going to be some difficulty there in meeting the requirements. When you look at just the level of expertise around accounting and bookkeeping that you might run into with some of those businesses, I'm kind of thinking we wind up in that 20, maybe 25 tops that get through this to the point where they're actually going to apply and qualify.
I support the 7,500 and up to 10. I'm okay with that.
Any other input around that?
No, I'm fine with that.
Okay, so we'll set the bar at 7,500 and include language just to ensure that we utilize funds in the entirety, if possible.
Lee, I have a question on that then. Do we need to shorten up the date that they get everything into use so we have enough time to reallocate additional money? Do we need to make sure that we're conscious of staying in that window?
So what we tell the notified applicants is that they've got 5 business days to return everything. The reality is we're lucky if a third of them actually get everything back in that time frame. It's crazy how much you have to chase people to give them money. I think a realistic, I mean, we're not talking about thousands of applications here, but it might take, it'll take 2 or 3 weeks to kind of track everyone down. I think that's manageable. If it's a month in, we're trying to figure out then how to reallocate the dollars. You're going to have plenty of time to get this done before the end of November.
Thank you.
I think that largely covers the outline of the program. Are we okay moving on to the application?
I think so.
I guess probably the easiest way on this one, were there any items on there that anybody thinks require revision or clarification? By and large, most of what we've got there is necessary information that we're going to need to collect through the process. But if there's anything anybody feels like we should amend or additions that are needed, jump on in.
We're going to have to take a look at it as far as if you agree to retain Lee based on today's discussion, to redo this. And so we would take a process as far as applications being able to be accepted beginning a certain date here, assuming or when we have everything ready, that we can target what that date might be, allowing for at least a couple weeks of advertising. Isn't that what you've generally used, or have you found that to be a workable time frame, Lee?
Yeah, I think on the front end, all I really need is I need 3 or 4 days to build the application. Once we decide, yep, we're going to go forward on this, we know sort of the basic questions we have to ask. We do allow for, if there are some specific questions you want to tag on for survey purposes, then I need a couple of days to turn around to my IT guy and say, okay, now build this application. I think in the past we had been talking or proposing that you pre-advertise the program with a launch date in the future. I'm less concerned about that now. I think seeing now as we go through more of these programs, I don't think it's the worst thing to announce the program really alongside or close to when you're opening the application. At least then when people are seeing it, they don't have to go put on their calendar, oh, I'll have to check back on this in 2 weeks when it opens, they can see the announcement and go straight to the application. Yeah, I think a realistic scenario is, I mean, if you guys said this morning, let's do this, when could you have this live to go? We'd be looking at next week. I just need a little bit of time to kind of work through with you specifically what's in the application and then to build the IT to get it up and running.
Chuck or Mike, would we need to have the city attorney review the application?
I have shared it with him. He and I haven't had a chance to go through it. I think other than the questions, probably the last 4 questions in the application, we can talk right now. We don't necessarily need to include those. Lee would tell you as we walk through that, they were there for a reason, that they were used in trying to have preferences for earmarking funds going to certain types of entities. So we can take a look at it, and quite frankly, from my end of it, there's a number of those last 4 that probably don't even need to be in the application.
Yeah, and then just running through it, I think the only, we'd need to revise a few of those questions to match our eligibility requirements, but beyond that, I think that would meet the scope of things.
Yeah, I don't think number 7 fits totally from what we.
Right. And then 7 and 8.
Yeah.
we can still ask the question, but obviously we've decided on different eligibility standards there.
Same with the 11.
Yeah.
The truth is, asking for eligibility questions in the application is it's sort of a wasted effort anyway. I mean, we still have to, whether we ask them what their revenue is or how many employees they have or whatever, we still have to confirm it in the eligibility review anyway.
Okay.
So is owner's race, ethnicity, gender, and veteran status, is that a requirement for somebody? CARES Act or?
I think that's what Mike was saying, that those 4 questions would be eliminated.
Oh, good, yeah, okay, I didn't catch that, thank you.
But they were added in Savage, and I don't know, Joe, and I think the Scott County CDA included those to be able to help with the Savage program, correct?
Correct. They had a specific amount of funds that they wanted to designate.
To minority businesses.
Correct.
So from my opinion, we don't even need the last 4.
Yeah.
Unless you saw some purpose in wanting to have that to be any part of the evaluation criteria.
My only concern would be if we get that question in hindsight, if we've got constituents that want to know where the money went. Did it go to minority-owned businesses? Did any of it go to women-owned businesses? Those sorts of things. I don't know, just from a transparency aspect, if that's information that we would see as valuable or being able to provide, rather than just simply saying, I don't know. You know, this is our chance to collect it.
Yeah, those are 2 better questions than the last 4.
Well, but that would come to answer Brent's question. Some of that would come from those questions.
Yeah, but I think if you asked it directly like that, I think it would be more straightforward and we get what we wanted rather than.
Because I think largely where we should probably be prepared is on the back end of this, is if we get requests, where did the money go? Who were the recipients? Those sorts of things. I just, again, back to the review of the city attorney as well. I don't think we want to leave ourselves open to just both from a reputational standpoint, looking like we didn't have our stuff together there. You know, they're reasonable questions that I could expect to hear from somebody in the community who wanted to look into this. If there was anything, whether, you know, people are going to be talking about where this money goes, who receives this money. And I think just from an accountability and transparency standpoint, there might be some value to having that information.
I think it's just important to make it clear in the application, and we will definitely do that, that those questions they're below the line questions. They are not, they're not used
if you want to answer them.
It's voluntary, and you do need to offer prefer not to answer as an option for those questions if you want to ask them. Yeah.
What information can we expect to get as debriefing after this? What information, I know it's confidential, the information people are giving you, and we won't see the nitty gritty of it, but what will we get at the end? Will we get a listing of how many employees or jobs are touched by this, or will we know, what kind of information will you give back to us?
That's a great question. So what we're telling people when they do these applications and they're certifying when they submit the application is that the information they're providing as part of the application is public record. So any questions you ask here is information that we will share with you. What isn't public record is then when we ask them after the fact, now send us your tax return, send us your 941, send us your income statements for these time periods. That information we don't share. So in terms of any of that information that you want to get to have as reportable information or public information on the program, we do need to ask it here so that the applicant understands that that information will be shared. So to carry forward on your question, it may not be useful from a review perspective to ask the applicant in the application process, how many employees do you have? But that does become the survey data that we're going to share with you. Hey, you got 35 applications. Here's what they said their business industry was. Here's what they said their number of employees was. Here's what they said their annual revenue was.
So we won't have any question related to the amount of lost revenue.
Right. I will tell you that they had lost revenue. I will certify that they had lost revenue because that's required for the CARES Act. We won't give you the documentation to say, hey, this business on the corner here, this is what they did in February for sales, this is what they did in April for sales. We won't share that publicly. So, and we can talk about how now metadata is different, maybe. I mean, we can talk about that. If you want me to be looking at what the total loss is, you want me to look at what total eligible expenses are and do some level of reporting on the back end to you to say, hey, on average, applicants lost X percentage of revenue. I mean, these are things that we can figure out how to kind of collect as we go.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anything else on the application? So if I'm hearing correctly, are you wanting to leave in 26, 7, and 8, but veteran status isn't necessary? Or are you wanting to leave all 4 of them in?
I'd prefer to leave all 4 in. I could see any one of those being requested.
Agree.
All right, we can do that.
From there, we move on. We've got just a draft letter that was used, which I think pretty well, again, there's going to be maybe a tweak or 2 in there that we need to make just to have it reflect our eligibility standards. But I think it's a good starting point to use for notification to get out to applicants to make kind of that secondary request of financials and verification information beyond the application. I think that we can largely work from the outline of what we established and from this to put together our notification letter once we receive an application.
Okay, then that budget piece that goes with that, Lee, are you thinking from the discussion you've heard today that we would take a look at the information for April, May, June, and July?
We can certainly add July to it. I mean, yeah, I think businesses can certainly still demonstrate impact in July, and I think that those expenses could certainly be eligible. We're not talking about putting out huge dollars here. The minimum that I've seen processing on the Scott County CDA applications for the last week is, even after subtracting PPP, idle, et cetera, the smallest amount of eligible expenses that businesses showed me so far, just looking at April, May, June, has been about $15,000. So I'm not anticipating there would be a huge issue in demonstrating expenses, but we can certainly open that window further. If you think you have very small businesses that may have a harder time showing the full dollar amount, we could certainly incorporate July expenses in there as well.
Yeah, I think the one area you kind of run into some of that with the reopening at the beginning of June is we did see some restaurants who actually had made it through without initially requesting PPP funding, tried to do some sort of limited reopening, saw a really big increase in expenses, and now are back. And I think there's about a week left to apply. And because of that attempt and having to scale back from that, they've decided now that they do want to apply for things. So I think the longer we can make that window, the more businesses we'll probably have that we're able to serve.
Sure.
So desire is to add July onto the mix?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I like the use of funds. I mean, that's just really simple. You know, it's not onerous in terms of the business owners. I think just their general reporting should make it pretty simple to fill that out. We just need to add the July column in there, as obviously we're getting pretty close to being through, and I think a lot of people will have that information to provide. So that brings us down to the contract for services. Mike, if you want to.
Yeah, I have given that to Scott to preliminarily take a look at, and he and I haven't gone through it, but it's the outline of what's there. Most of it, I think, is generally okay. Scott's got some things that he would want to add dealing with data practices, conflict of interest, non-discrimination, some of the boilerplate stuff that he normally would have, but he and I haven't had a chance to specifically go through it. This was prepared by Lee last week as a modification off some larger contracts, and so the intent was to try to keep it generally small in scope, easy to understand. And so I appreciated his quick reaction, because previously the agreement was with Scott County and then subset to the Scott County CDA, was it not?
Yeah, it was originally drafted for cities as an addendum to the CDA's application or contract. And I am just very clear on this. I am not an attorney. So if your city attorney has specific clauses or language they need included, I have zero issue with that.
So if I was to ask you to approve it, it would be contingent upon final review and interaction with the city attorney and Lee to finalize any changes. Unless there's specific questions or concerns from any of you at this point. Obviously, I really don't have too many. That the exhibit A to the agreement would be the scope of the program that we went through this morning. That gets attached as the exhibit A. That's the addressing the program guidelines underneath that. And so the scope of the program is $200,000. That the cost is $6,000 per each 100,000. So that ends up being a total of $12,000 to manage the program as their administration fee. And then upfront, there's a $2,000 for the development and hosting of the program application. So there is $8,000 due and payable up front when we execute it, and then the balance on the back end of $6,000 at the end of the program.
Mike, does this have to go back to city council or is this?
Well, that's kind of the question that we haven't answered in this whole thing, is that EDA made the request to do this. We've got only 3 of the 5. You know, we didn't really handle the finalization or discussion. Is that you know, is the council making these monies available to the EDA and then letting them handle the scope of the program, or are we wanting to take this whole package back to the council for them to review and basically put a stamp on it? That I can't answer that. That we've got 3 of the council here. Maggie is on vacation, so she wouldn't have been here. I thought Sean was going to be part of the discussion this morning. Then in taking a look at it, I think you can see the scope of what we have is whether we want to go back and to re-review all of this with the council, or whether there's enough comfort level that the EDA board can handle this under the scope of trying to provide the funding that the council identified that could be made available for this program.
Well, my opinion on it is the council gave the approval for utilizing this money, and kind of basically said, you know, EDA, you guys work out the logistics of the program. And I think since the contract would be with the EDA and Next Stage, I think once they approve it, I'm fine with that. I don't know what Rick's opinion is. Can't hear you, Rick.
Still can't hear you, Rick.
Your mic shows on, but we can't hear you, Rick. Bruce, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I'm comfortable with it since everyone had the opportunity to attend today's meeting. I think that's what the purpose was and why there's, so I guess I'm comfortable with it, but.
With what? With, as the mayor just described?
Right. My feeling was, are we in a position to okay and approve a contract if the city council needs to further approve it? If we don't feel a city council has to approve it, then we could certainly go ahead and approve the contract.
No, I think EDA has the authority that can do that you can do it.
Right, but if we sign a contract, city council says we're not going to do it, but you know what I mean?
That was kind of the reason for the parallel meeting this morning, to be able to take care of addressing that.
I agree. So I think we can proceed, in my opinion.
And I think Rick is probably trying to call in to the meeting here.
Yeah, I had the same thing happen to me. That's why I'm actually caller 3. For some reason, I think my computer took an update and restarted.
Lee, are you involved in any consumer programs for mortgage payments or anything like that?
Nope, nothing on that.
So cities use a different avenue or do it themselves for that kind of a grant program?
They must. I'm not honestly that familiar with them.
Okay. Brent or Eric or anyone, have you seen or aware much mortgage issues on a residential or consumer side? Have we seen a lot of issues with people lost their jobs, can't make their mortgage payments?
They're common. One of the bigger things that we're starting to see, I think, in the industry, I'm not that involved in that, and I think Eric probably oversees that end of the business a little bit more. But there's a lot of confusion amongst the terms on which people deferred things. A number of lenders, it sounds like their deferral programs set up a 90-day balloon to come due upon the end of their deferral period. So they're finding that, they didn't have to make the payment for that 90-day stretch, but now it's due in full. I guess I haven't heard what's being sought as resolution for a lot of those. It does sound like they're making attempts to work with the consumers in those instances, but I think you're going to see, as we get to the back end of the 90-day window, whether it winds up being PPP deferrals, forbearances, there's going to be another round of I don't know what the right word would be, another round of issues for the industry to work through because so much was done so quickly on the front end.
Are you there, Rick?
Hey, we got you, Rick. Got a green mic, Rick, if you can hear us.
Come on in, Barb.
Was Rick the only one listening online? Or, because he apparently fell offline, and now he's on part one, and I didn't know if you were doing a conference with a bunch of people or just talking to him.
Yeah, he needs,
So just tell him to dial back in.
well, he needs to either try to reconnect through the electronic meeting, the go-to meeting.
And he has all that information.
Yeah, he has this.
Okay.
Yeah, it appears that he's on.
It appears that he's on, because he's on the line with Barb right now.
No, tell him to call in. If he can't connect in electronically, to call in using this number.
Okay. All right, perfect. I'll let him know.
Okay.
Thank you.
We seemingly have this trouble with this challenge many times. We got to figure out what's wrong with his system. Because he was on at the beginning, was he not, Ken? Wasn't Rick on at the beginning?
He never talked though.
Been on the whole time.
I actually am supposed to be on a meeting with the county right now. Do you guys have more questions for me, or do you want to, because if you need to talk contract stuff amongst yourselves, I can just jump off and you can let me know if we're working together later. But I don't want to jump off if you have more questions or need more information from me.
I believe
I don't
we're
have
okay,
anything for you,
Lee,
Lee.
Mike.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Look forward to working with you. Yep,
I'll be in
sounds
touch.
good. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee.
$3, Rick. Come on, where are you?
Rick, are you there yet?
Pending his approval, do we want to formulate a motion?
So is it
Do you hear us, Rick?
Can't hear him though.
Turn it louder.
There, now we got caller 4. Maybe that's Rick.
That should be me. I'm going to get out.
I was just trying the call-in feature and it does work. So I don't know why we can't hear Rick. Rick, did you try to call in on your phone? Did you follow the instructions on the sheet? Because I just tried it and I got into the meeting. I don't know what to do for him.
Is there a chat function you can just type in comments in the meeting? This says chat is disabled by organizer, but if you can enable that, you can type in his
I turned it
comments
on.
to the,
Supposed to do that.
Michael, on the top right, there should be a balloon or the settings flower, like if you can open up the chat ability.
And now it says disabled by organizer.
Can you hear Rick?
Listen, you guys, it's not something with the system, it's something with the building. Go ahead, I can hear you, and I can give you my vote.
We can hear him now.
Yep, we got you there now, Rick.
He's on my phone.
So Rick, what's your opinion on, can the EDA make a motion to approve the contract and it doesn't have to go back to city council?
Yes, I vote yes.
He said he votes
He
yes.
said yes.
Yeah.
All right, well, if that's the
Okay.
case, then I will make a motion to enter into a contract for the amount stated with Next Stage to assist us in a small business assistance program with modifications to the contract to reflect those deemed necessary by the city attorney and to reflect the earlier scope of the program which we outlined.
Can you just outline the first 3 bullets we kind of talked about, the 1 to 20 employees or owner operated under $1 million in revenue, or
Correct.
falling under the executive order? Is that the
Yep.
proper language? Okay, thank you.
I'll second that.
That whole motion down.
I had a
I'll
second
second
either
that.
from
This is
Eric
Chuck. I'll
and
second
or
that.
Chuck. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Have
opposed?
How many EDA members do I have?
Yeah.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Eric is gone, isn't he?
No, Eric's here.
Yeah, Eric's on.
I'm still here.
Nick's the only one who left.
Nick left.
Yeah, Nick's off. Any
Okay.
opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Chuck, do you want to do that on the parallel side with the council so that I have interacted with the EDA, you want to take a motion in a second on the city council side that the council's okay with the EDA handling the contract and the program?
Okay, I guess I'll make a motion to, second by Bruce. Any other comments? If not, Mayor Nikolai says aye. Councilmember Wolf?
Aye.
Councilmember Seiler? Aye, okay. So it passes 3-0.
All right, that's good for me. I've got it.
Okay. Anything else?
I believe that gets us through the agenda. I would take do we want to, at what point do we want to pick up the actual mechanics, timeframes, everything that we've got to do from that end?
Well, we would need to talk to Lee and take a look at, he said it's going to take 3 to 4 days
Yeah.
to have it ready to go. And so then as we take a look at that as to when we're done, assuming we can get the city attorney's review and approval of the contract and get that done, then to try to take a look at what makes the most sense for the advertising timeframe and the announcement, so that when we get ready to announce it, that we've got everything online ready to go, that people can go right to it, with the understanding that we're going to have about 2 weeks of advertising for people to submit applications. That what we can do is we can try to work that out and get that out to you and let you know what we think is most workable after we spend a little bit of time with it here.
Do you want a motion just with us approving to give you the green light, follow your guidance as far as timing and rollout, or is that something we'd need to reconvene on?
No, then let's do it now.
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries with no opposition. And that gets us to the point we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
So be it.
Second that, all in favor?
Aye.
Was that Eric and Brent?
Troy.
Oh,
Troy was
Troy,
the
I'm sorry.
second?
Thanks, everybody.
Meeting adjourned.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
guess
thanks, everybody.
Let's do the city
I'll make a
council.
motion to close the city council meeting.
Second.
Second by Bruce. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, passes 3-0. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ken.